Codes Committee and co-chair of the General Conference Public Protection Subcommittee. And I would like to introduce the following Assembly members. Charles Levine, Chair of the Judiciary Committee, Eric Dallon, Chair of the Corrections Committee, John McDonald, Chair of the Governmental Operations Committee, Phil Palmisano, Minority Ranker on A Committee, probably Energy.
I'm Ranker on Energy.
As well as alternate members Edward Gibbs, Monique Chandler Waterman, and Edward Flood.
Greetings, good afternoon, everyone, and good evening, rather. I'm Senator Jamal Bailey, co-chair of the Joint Budget Subcommittee on Public Protection and chair of the Codes Committee, Public Protection, Criminal Justice, and Judiciary. I'd like to introduce the following senators. The chair of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Brad Holdman Siegel. The chair of the Consumer Protection Committee, Senator Kevin Thomas. The ranking member of the Codes and Judiciary Committee, Senator Anthony Palumbo. There are other members of the Senate who will be present, but please understand that there are a number of these meetings happening there, and senators may be in other hearings at present. Assemblymember Dinowitz.
I would also like to take the time to introduce Hannah Gautier as the recording secretary for the Assembly.
And Amelia Sacco as the recording secretary for the Senate. I will now go over the Joint Budget Subcommittee guidelines. 1. Co-chairs shall determine all matters of parliamentary procedure unless otherwise specified by these rules. Any dispute with regard to procedure that cannot be resolved by the co-chairs shall be referred back to the General Conference Committee and shall be resolved by the co-chairs of the General Conference Committee. Number 2, co-chairs shall each designate a staff person to serve as secretary for the purpose of taking minutes. Number 3, an alternate may participate in a subcommittee meeting but shall not vote upon any deliberations of such subcommittee unless he or she has been designated to fill an excused vacancy in such subcommittee. Such designation shall be made by the co-chair of the General Conference Committee representing the House in which the excused vacancy exists. If such vacancy is in a minority seat on the subcommittee, then the designation shall be made upon the recommendation of the respective House's minority representative of the General Conference Committee. Such designation shall be made as soon as practicable by the appropriate co-chair by providing notice to the other co-chair of the General Conference Committee. An excused absence in the General Conference Committee may be filled by a temporary designation of a member by the co-chair of the General Conference Committee representing the House in which the excused vacancy exists. Number 4, no subcommittee members or alternate members shall be permitted to participate via proxy. Number 5, subcommittees shall restrict their deliberations to the respective subject areas as determined by the General Conference Committee. Any issues which are determined to be non-germane by the co-chairs shall be referred back to the General Conference Committee. Number 6, each member shall be permitted a reasonable period of time as determined by the co-chairs to discuss any matter germane to the subject area of the subcommittee. And finally, number 7, no report shall be filed except upon the affirmative vote of a majority of the members of each House's delegation of the subcommittee. As a matter of housekeeping, we have been joined by the chair of the Education Committee, Senator Shelley Mayer, and the chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Crimes, Crime Victim, and Corrections, Julia Salazar. Assemblymember Dinowitz, sir.
One of our members representing the minority would like to take a minute to say a couple of words. Assemblymember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members, for allowing us to say a few words on behalf of the Assembly Minority Conference. As we move forward into budget negotiations, we hope you take these opinions we bring here today into consideration in an open and transparent manner. As always, the Assembly Minority Conference will always look to priorities public safety. We have concerns relative to what we believe is a soft on crime approach that's been adopted in the legislature. You know, it's policies that we've talked about that obviously have come up on a regular basis is bail reform, the inadequacies of bail reform, the need to allow judges discretion when dealing with the dangerousness of an individual and bail-eligible crimes, the need, we believe, to finally reinstate the collaboration between law enforcement and federal ICE officials when dealing with migrants who commit crimes, legislation that we have like Lakin's Law. Certainly we're happy to see a good step in the right direction with the governor bringing up a retail theft issue that's growing. We'd like to see some funding for local law enforcement as well on this issue. The other issue that the governor mentioned that we would have liked to see in the budget is a deal with this plague of the sticker stores, which continue to plague our local communities all across the state. Finally, we need to give our local law enforcement the ability to shut down these illegal operations in our communities. The other issue that we'd like to just briefly mention is certainly the prison closure issue that we're all well aware of. The governor wants a 90-day notification. The Assembly majority rejected that. We appreciate that. The Senate majority had a 180-day. We believe we have the right to reject a 90-day notification. We should reject it. 1 year is bad enough, but a 90-day closure notification is an insult to the brave men and women who are working a dangerous job to keep us safe and those who are working in a dangerous environment. To think that they can find a new home and a new school for their kids in 90 days is not adequate. This doesn't just affect our NYSCOBA union officials, it affects PEF, CSCA, and ASME. During the budget hearings, the commissioner did say that they were shutting down prisons because there's a workforce crisis, which is ridiculous because we have a nursing shortage crisis in our state too, but we don't ask nursing homes and hospitals to shut down. Closing down prisons is not an issue to address the workforce crisis. We should be looking at serious recruitment and retention issues. When you have shortages, we see in the healthcare, even in the private sector, they offer recruitment bonuses. We should have retention bonuses. We need to pay better and give better benefits. One issue we could do is something that did pass the legislature last year unanimously, was included in the Senate one-house budget, wasn't in our budget, but the governor vetoed it last year, said it should be in the budget. She didn't put it in the budget, which should be the death gamble legislation, which would only cost $11 million in the context of a $230+ billion is not a lot of money. To think that a spouse of someone who's working a dangerous job gets to a 25-year retirement and they work a couple years later and then die, then their spouse would not be entitled to that pension. We believe the death gamble legislation should be part of the final budget negotiation. Again, $11 million, the governor said put in the budget, so we urge our colleagues in the majorities when we're doing this negotiation, include the death gamble provision in the budget. That will certainly help to retain a workforce, and we need to look at other ways and creative ways to recruit and retain our corrections officers and those that work in that field. The answer is not to shut down more facilities. That's not an answer to the workforce shortage. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dinowitz. The ranking member of the Codes and Judiciary Committee, Senator Anthony Palumbo.
Thank you, Chairman. We're on, very good. I appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments. I do associate myself with a lot of what was said by Assemblymember Palmisano. I believe the Senate One House was a mixed bag of some good things that we'd like to see. Certainly the rejection of the 90-day notice for the closure of those prisons, because of course these folks live and work in those areas, and that would be a very dramatic change in a short period of time. We'd like the 1 year, which is the current statute. I did like to see some changes to retail theft. I appreciate the fact that we can aggregate the crimes and over a 90-day period. I'd like to see a little bit longer, but the aggregation of it is smart. But ultimately, the only bail-eligible larceny is grand larceny, first degree, which is a B felony, which is over $1 million. So I don't expect that retail theft, that anyone, even if they were working together in concert with hundreds of people, could steal over $1 million necessarily. That's a little bit unrealistic. So I get the idea. I appreciate that. Generally, with regard to public safety, deja vu all over again. We had out by me a group of individuals who dismembered a human corpse, 2 of them, and that's not a bail-eligible offense. So I know I proposed this back in 2019 when I was in the Assembly and debated the bill, but I think we should consider something almost like an aggregation that's being considered with respect to retail theft, is that based on the level of crime, we should have possibly an incremental basis where if you don't want to allow bail for any misdemeanors, ultimately maybe even include, because I know dangerousness, we've talked about it for years. I don't think there's any appetite. Unfortunately, I think that we're the only state in the union that does not have a dangerousness standard, including the federal level. But even for lower level felonies, have maybe a 60-day window if bail were to be set where the people need to be ready for trial, something along those lines, almost like an exaggerated 180A statute where if you're not ready and you haven't met the threshold, you'll need to prioritize certain cases, because we continue to make changes to particularly the bail and discovery reform when something egregious happens, which I think we can all agree is not appropriate. I don't think anyone feels that the depravity level needed to dismember a human corpse does not require a judge to have the ability to at least hold that person pre-trial. So, I think there will be more examples of this as we go along. So again, I do appreciate some of these changes. I would like to have seen more. I know we have a task force on retail theft. We don't need a task force. It's really not a difficult issue. We need law enforcement to be able to do their job and not be handcuffed. And really, it's the stroke of a pen that will make those changes. Very simply, that we've seen National Guard deployed to assist the NYPD. They don't need any help. Unfortunately, you could send, I've said this before, you could send 10,000 National Guards men and women down to New York City, and it wouldn't really make much of a difference, unfortunately. So those are the things I'd really like to see in the final enacted budget. One other aspect I'd like to comment real quick about is eliminating surcharges, and I understand that there might want to be some changes made, but I think eliminating them entirely, it's upwards of $500 million that is generated annually by mandatory surcharges and fines. That's part of the sanction of being involved in the criminal justice system. And obviously that also helps the wheels continue to turn with DCJS and OCA and so forth. So I'd like that to be reconsidered, that I understand that a means test, which is kind of a difficult thing, was employed, but or was at least offered. I would just like to make sure that that's done smartly, and maybe again, instead of doing what we've been doing the past few years, doing a really bold step in a direction which actually doesn't work and makes us more dangerous, let's do it incrementally. Let's get there the smart way. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to the further negotiations regarding the final enacted budget.
Thank you, Senator Palumbo. I will reserve my comments for the end. Assemblymember Dinowitz.
So we're going to be discussing at the Public Protection Joint Conference Committee the following state agencies in the judiciary: the Office of Court Administration, the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, the Department of Criminal Justice Services, the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, the Office of Indigent Legal Services, the Department of Law, the Commission on Judicial Conduct, Division of Military and Naval Affairs, Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, Division of State Police, and Office of Victim Services. So we will look forward to working with the Senate and the executive to provide critical funding to enhance public protection in New York, and we hope to provide toll-free calls in corrections facilities, funding for prosecutorial services, pretrial services, civil legal services, and increased fundings for tackling retail theft, gun violence prevention programs, victim assistance services, rape crisis centers, defense services, attorney loan forgiveness, hate crime prevention, as well as various policy proposals that would create a safer New York.
And on behalf of the Senate, we look forward to working with the Assembly and the Executive on restoring vital criminal justice funding, increasing funding for gun violence prevention programs, providing state funding to support pay increases and cost of living adjustment for assigned counsel, addressing issues related to retail theft, providing free transportation for prison visits, providing state funding to support discovery, pretrial services, alternatives to incarceration programs, the inclusion of the Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act and the Grieving Families Act, as well as extended operations and services for incarcerated individuals suffering from a mental illness. I was going to give closing remarks, but that would give Tony a heads up as to how we're going to debate when it's time to debate. So with that being said, I think that our great staff, both on the Senate and the Assembly side, will have conversation and consultation with members, and we will continue to work through the issues. That being said, we stand adjourned. Thank you.